Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week. We have a fascinating guest. He is a barrister and QC, started an incredible movement called the Black Talent Charter. He's a commercial practice lawyer in energy and natural resources, very topical, public international law and cross-border disputes, among many other things that he does. I've been looking forward to having him on this podcast for about 12 months. And because he's in such demand, today has been the first day I've managed to get this recording. So without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. My name is Harry Matovu, QC. I am a barrister and QC at Brick Court Chambers, one of the leading sets in commercial law and competition law in the Temple in London. And I have been a barrister for 30 years in practice there since my training as a junior barrister and now as a QC. So 30 years in practice, and I'm delighted to join you, Jonathan, and to join everybody else who may be listening to this podcast on this great series, Inspiring Leadership.
Thank you very much.
I'll hand back to you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Harry. It's lovely to have you on. You and I were talking earlier about a fascination we both have about leadership over the centuries, over the years, how it's morphed and changed. What is your understanding of leadership, how it's evolved and what it means now, particularly this theme of inspiring leadership?
Yeah, when you asked me to come onto this podcast, Jonathan, I just sat back and thought, what is it that I've got to say? Because as many people know, as a barrister in private practice, I'm a self-employed practitioner. So I sat back and said, well, I've got no leadership experience of my own to speak of. What is leadership? And it seems to me that leadership, or where I've got to so far, is that leadership involves the ability to set a course to produce a desired outcome. And nations have the aim of security, prosperity, peace, and growth. Individuals may have self-fulfillment, maturity, and happiness. And then the second thing is the ability to make others follow that course that you have set. And the third point is the ability to make them follow that course to the max, to bring their best selves to the project that you have identified. And when I followed that through, I looked back to see, well, is leadership now the same sort of leadership as we would have had in history? And that's what we've been discussing. And I did classics at university, which I enjoyed enormously. And I remember that in Homeric times, the ideal of leadership started with nobility. You could not be a leader unless you were a nobleman. And the other great quality that was required of a leader was the ability to fight valiantly in battle to protect your community. And then one moves forward to perhaps the Roman Republican times, where you get the concept of leadership being service to the state. It's no good to be somebody who enjoys the arts and who has private interest in the arts. You've got to put your qualities to the service of the state. And then one moves forward to the Renaissance, and of course Machiavelli, who wrote one of the earliest treatises on leadership. And what one gets out of Machiavelli is the idea of leadership perhaps as an end in itself, rather than of service to the state, as an end in itself, as a career. And that's what he was talking about. How do you become a leader and maintain that position as a career against all the opponents who may come up against you? And it is out of that that you develop in Machiavelli the concept of the leader who will be prepared to do terrible things, if necessary, in order to remain a leader. And then beyond that, one gets the obvious example of wartime leadership. And that brings us right up to the modern age. What is a modern leader? And what makes an effective modern leader? And that's no doubt something we're going to explore in our discussion going forward today. But it seems to me that throughout all those historical trends and changes, one theme that stands out is the theme of leadership by example. And I think that still holds true very much today. So you get Hector in the Iliad, Homer's great masterpiece, leading by example, showing himself to be a wonderful husband, caring leader of his community, as well as a valiant fighter. And now we get leadership by example today. And perhaps the most thrilling and most evocative example of that sort of leadership, inspiring, quiet, exemplary leadership, is Henry V, Shakespeare's Henry V, going round the campfires at Agincourt, giving a little touch of Harry in the Night, as the famous passage said. And I think that still holds true very much today. And in the TV age in which we live, the sort of age of realism, the post-deferential age, I'd say that leadership's hallmarks require a certain modesty, which again you see in that passage in Henry V, and authenticity, which again you see in Henry V, a conviction in your cause, which again you see in Henry V, and a quiet courage, which is pervaded across the campfires in that celebrated passage. And so that, it seems to me, is something that has held true down the ages, and it's a pretty good yardstick to seeing what is a great leader in any sphere.
I completely love the way you've described that, and this idea of what I call the three hums from Professor Roger Steer, a friend of mine: humanity, humility, and humor. At times you need to cheer people up with a bit of lightness as well as being very dour and sad. But I think there was that very good book, Strong Man Leadership, about the likes of Putin, Bolsonaro, Xi Jinping, the Hungarian Orban, and the Turkish Prime Minister, where there's this machismo coming back in again, Boris, similar kind of thing, and populism, rather than those lovely qualities of humility and calmness and leadership by example and service to others. It's become self-service and people following the big person, but actually they've lost their moral compass. So I think, bring us back to Henry V. I do love that one, we few, we happy few.
And Jonathan, I think what you said is absolutely right. The reason why populism is not the same thing as leadership is because it misses that third ingredient that I mentioned at the top of my comments, which is the ability to make the people who follow you do it to the max, to bring their best selves to the project that you've identified. And populists simply don't do that. And we see that in the those who are described as populists today. It's all about themselves. They don't bring people with them to get the best out of them to the max.
No, they don't. And people have got to willingly follow, not because they have to, but they are inspired by that exemplary selflessness of the person, that they want to follow that man or woman.
Yes.
And
if you don't want to get the best out of people, for me, fundamentally, you are a failure as a leader. You cannot be a leader.
Yeah. A leader's got to have followership, where and it's interesting, and you're an example from many conversations we've had, and it was the former Lord Mayor, Sir William Russell, who said the person you've got to get on this series is Harry Matovu, because he said there's that lovely humility, but yet you are a leader, even though you're an individual, self-employed, as it were, in some ways, what you do, in that, whether it be the Black Talent Charter that you've set up, which I'd love you to talk about in a moment, but you've taken a step to stand up for things, which is, you got fired at, you got shot at, people have had a pop at you, but you're not going for popularity, which is the populism. You're going for respect because you're doing the right thing. And that's important. Yeah. Tell us about the Black Talent Charter, if you would.
The Black Talent Charter is something which has absorbed my thinking over the last 3 years, since before George Floyd died. And it has arisen in this way, Jonathan. I as I've said, been a barrister for 30 years. For many of those years, I was the only black barrister at the English Commercial Bar, which, as you and many others will know, is one of the more well-paid ends of the bar. There are lots of black barristers in the publicly funded area of the bar, but in the lucrative parts of the bar, there are very few. And it occurred to me that once I'd got a voice as a QC to whom some people may listen, it's time I did something about this. And I experienced at close hand the naked racism that colleagues of mine had experienced and which they spoke about, as well as the more subtle forms of racism, which I myself had experienced when I was junior and which I couldn't do anything about because I didn't have a voice to do anything about them. And I thought that the time had come to take a stand and to speak up for those who had experienced that. And so I developed this charter for Black talent, which was modeled on the Women in Finance Charter, because everybody who spoke about diversity in terms of gender, but nobody wanted to talk about race. There's a nervousness about talking about race in this country, and they all want to bury it under diversity, and then they move seamlessly to discussions of gender or discussions of social mobility, but they don't like talking about race. And I thought it was high time this happened. So I developed the charter based on the Women in Finance Charter, which many know about, which has been very successful in getting women into senior positions in the city. And as I was developing that, then the world seemed to change with George Floyd's murder in the US, and everybody suddenly realizing that race was a problem. As a result of that, many senior people in the city wanted to engage with this debate. And so I took my project around the city, got a great level of engagement, and in due course, in October of 2020, we went live with this charter where we encouraged companies who signed up to the charter to pledge to establish targets and action plans to get Black people into senior positions in the city. And it was focused very much on Black people because Black professionals are the most underrepresented group in the city and in that sector of the economy. The stereotypes work against Black people. We're meant to be very good at running and jumping and dancing. I can do one of those three, but not anything else. But we're not meant to be very good at doing clever things. And that ridiculous stereotype holds very strongly. Even in the most subtle ways, it is very deeply ingrained. And I want to bring out fundamental change to the way Black people are perceived, Black professionals are perceived in the city. We're thought of as risks, you see. Every time a leading assignment or a big case comes up, the first instinct when you have a Black professional in your organization is to question whether it should go to that Black professional, whether the client would be comfortable with it going to that Black professional. And I want to change the whole way of thinking so that when a big assignment comes in, you're not looking at the Black professional, you're looking at a professional. And if that person is the best person for the job, you give that job to that person, regardless of the quotient of melanin in their skin.
Yeah, yeah.
And hopefully one day that will come. So that's the project that I've embarked on. And it does require, as you said, it does require people, me, to stand up and be counted.
Yeah, well, look, congratulations. And I think it's really key. And I'm so pleased that not only you started it before people began to pay attention to this crucial area of race, but that you've given a huge amount of your time at your own expense to really champion this on behalf of others. And that, for me and for so many others, is leadership. So please keep going. And you know, you've got a voice. Let's use it. This is why, you know, I've got a voice. This podcast going out to 110 countries around the world and 77,000 people. they're key people and they're key decision makers. It's not just going for likes, it's going for people who have the ability to influence others. And you and I talked about my leadership retreat in Peru that I had, and we also spoke about my brother's death. And I had a rather morbid thought that I was going to die soon myself, a bit like my elder brother, and that my time was soon up. And actually, I remembered my father's words before he was killed, when it was passed on to me, that he always said, "Don't die with the music still in you." And also, there's a lovely lady who was from Trinidad and Tobago, who I met in Peru on the course. And she said, "Jonathan," she said, "you've got a lot of dancing in you." And so I'm going to find my voice and do my dancing. And I want you to find your voice. And it's going to be through this podcast and many other mediums. Your life journey has led you to be the leader you are today, Harry. Tell us a little bit about the journey, about upbringing and where you start out in life, and perhaps 2 or 3 individuals who've shaped you as the leader you are today.
Well, Jonathan, this is a question which I find, I'll be frank with you, I find it difficult to discuss. Because I'm a very private person. I don't like talking about myself. But as you say, I've put myself up there to lead in a certain area. And so I accept that I need to tell people where I have come from. What people see of me is somebody who knows how to string a sentence together, I hope, who is obviously the outcome of a very privileged education, which I have indeed had. I was educated at Eton College, as was my brother, and that is because my father wanted to give us, being an African father, the best education that he thought he could give us, and he considered that to be the classic English private education. So I'm a child of privilege. But my story before that and behind that is not the most easy story. My father was not an easy man. He was a person with a lot of stress and a lot of pressures on him. And like many African fathers of that generation, he was quite a tough parent. My mother suffered from mental health issues throughout her life, which meant that for extended periods, she was away from us in hospital. And eventually my parents split when I was 11 years old. And it was a very difficult home environment in which my brother, my sister, and I grew up. School was a sanctuary for us from home life. And I certainly found my time at school, for that reason, all the more enjoyable, as well as having the benefits of all the facilities and wonderful opportunities that a school like that offers. And so I am the product of both the privilege of that education and also the travails, if I can put it that high, of a home life which required one to acquire a pretty strong basis of resilience. I am a combination of those two. And I have never tried to forget, and I've always tried to keep in mind where I come from. I haven't mentioned that my heritage is Ugandan. My parents were both 100% Ugandan. They were African. I am African heritage 100%. I have never forgotten where I come from. And so I straddle a world in which I am both one thing and the other. To white folk, many of them say, well, I don't count as a Black person because I'm obviously white, having had the education that I've had. To Black folk, I'm often told, well, I don't really count for them because I'm obviously white from the privileges I have had. And yet there are other white folk who will say, well, I'm not white because I'm clearly Black. And so others have spoken about this, the schizophrenia of having to negotiate and navigate two worlds. and it's most clearly and most strongly being identified in a fantastic speech, which was made by the current US Chief of Air Staff, General Brown, in the wake of George Floyd's death, which he called Navigating Two Worlds, where you're not accepted either by your Black community or by the white community in which you pursue your career. Mm. And that has given me a resilience and an interior life, a life of curiosity, a life of questioning, of self-questioning, which has never left me. And I think that informs a lot of what I think, and it informs everything of who I am.
Wow, Harry, that in itself is probably one of the most powerful stories and acknowledgements of a life situation that you're in, this straddling of two worlds particularly, and that ability to see things from multiple perspectives as well, and not to be boxed and not to be judged as you are a whatever it is. Thank you. I know
that very well, Jonathan. It is very much that determination not to be judged.
Yeah.
And how to deal with it when, as always is the case, one is judged.
Yeah. And two of my lifetime struggles is one, to be less judgmental, and two, to be non-attached. Less judgmental about myself or people who are different from me, things that I aspire to do. But often when you're pointing the finger at someone else, there's three fingers pointing back, as they say, because there's so much it's often the things you don't like in someone else, there's much of it in you that you're spotting in them. And this attachment to being a something, a label, a this, a that, or better than that. Or I was listening to a fascinating book about the biology of belief, I think it's called. I've forgotten the biologist, but he was saying that, you had Darwin with survival of the fittest and this competition, red in tooth and claw, as Tennyson would say, versus Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who was saying, actually, it's about cooperation. In your body, your cells aren't competing with each other. Somewhere they're more collaborating, and we've actually got to collaborate with each other across different races, different communities, different lives, whatever it may be. And we're not. We've been, the Anglo-American approach is highly competitive, and I was brought up in the military where every week I was being ranked and rated against the other officers at Staff College or as an instructor at Sandhurst, and felt good or bad in comparison to somebody else. He was better than me. And even as a managing director in a PLC, I remember the chief finance officer saying, Graham, last week you were a hero, but this week you're a zero because your numbers are worse than Jonathan. Jonathan, this week you're the hero because you've done better than Graham. And yet he expected us to collaborate. But we were being set off against each other. I don't know if that triggers for you.
And this takes us right back to what we were discussing at the beginning of our chat. What is leadership? Is it populism? Is it populism born of and fostered by competition and the fire of victory? Or is it a leadership which requires a communitarian approach, which makes you give back to your community and bring out the best of the other constituent members of your community?
Yeah.
And that is so fundamental, it seems to me, to the whole notion of leadership down the ages, and particularly today in this diverse world.
Correctly, and needed more than ever today. I'm writing the next book, which you are going to be in, Harry, which is CEOs and Teams Inspiring Leadership. And as I'm writing it, I'm going that people are saying to me, there's such a shortage of leadership in our politicians, not just in this country, my American friends and friends in other countries, in France and Italy and elsewhere. And more than ever, we need leaders with humility and cooperation and respect for others, rather than the populism. And I'm going to be up here, so therefore you're going to be down there. And that seesaw effect of you're either up or you're down. So important.
And it makes you think, why is it that the people who aspire to political leadership these days do so. And at the moment, when you look across the world at the populists, they are devoid of political ideas, it seems to me, serious political ideas, and they just want leadership as an end in itself.
Yeah.
So we're back to the cartoon of Machiavelli. Machiavelli, incidentally, didn't think this. He thought that you should aspire to leadership in order to do good.
Yes.
And if you had to break eggs to do that, that was justified. But he didn't espouse leadership as an end in itself. And that is what populism seems to be in its practice nowadays.
And there was a comment on a certain prime minister who somebody said that his only ambition in life was to become prime minister. That's a problem. Yes. Because now he's achieved his ambition. What's he going to do now?
Yes.
And you actually want people who have this idea about, as we were brought up at Sandhurst at the Military Academy, our motto is serve to lead, that officers eat last, and that humility was admired, and that when an officer did something that lacked trust and was unethical and broke the law, he didn't need to be pushed. He just stood up and said, I resign. I have done wrong. I resign. I step down. But this day, that there seems to be no parameters, no sense of ethics and integrity. We'll come back to that in a moment.
Yeah.
So much we could talk about this, Harry. Thank you. Gosh, it's very stimulating. Let's go back to you again. In your life experience, what was one of your proudest and happiest moments? And then perhaps tell us of a darkest moment. And again, I know you're a very private man, but what they taught you, not the fact that you had them, because I do find the finest, most humble leaders are the one who are prepared to be appropriately vulnerable at the right time, so that we can see, oh, this person, Harry, isn't completely out there and I just can't relate to him, but he's like me, he's had problems too. So proudest moment, darkest moment, and your learning.
I'll start with the latter, and the darkest moments I've already described. It's a home life where a parent is clearly very sick, and you're very young and you're growing and having to navigate that, and not betraying it or not feeling that you can betray it at school. And that taught me resilience. And it's also something that my father expected of us, because I watched him trying to deal with it. And to be frank, he didn't deal with it very well. And I can understand how, when you are trying to hold down a job, I can now understand, being a father myself of 3 sons, that when you are trying to hold down a job and to secure the safety and well-being of your children and deal with a very sick spouse, it can go badly wrong. And so navigating his problems as well as my mother's problems was a challenge for someone of the age of my brother, my sister, and myself.
Yeah. What was your father doing work-wise? What was
he was working. He was a UN diplomat. So we left Uganda after the first coup in 1966. And then eventually in 1970, he got a job at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which was headquartered in Vienna, Austria. And there he stayed and worked until his retirement. And he was hoping to go back to Uganda at any time. Conditions weren't right. And then just when he thought that he was able to move back following retirement, sadly, he contracted cancer, which killed him very quickly.
Very sorry.
So he died young at 64.
Wow. Wow. No, that is.
So those were that was the darkness.
What about the light? What about the light? What about the
light? Is being a father is the abiding pleasure of my life and pride of my life. And seeing my sons, who are now 24, 22, and 18, becoming the people that they have become, is a matter which gives me more pride and happiness than anything in the world. That I have given them, with my wonderful wife, my glorious wife, a happy home. A happy home in which to grow up, a safe environment in which to grow up, and also a certain body of values which I can see them living by.
Yeah.
That is a great matter of pride.
Yeah, and I think from your experience, and crikey, I'm sorry for what you've been through. I suppose in a different way, with my mother bringing 3 boys up on her own, I've desperately tried to get it right. This is my second and my last marriage, but I was divorced, and I'm very disappointed that I didn't make that marriage work. But I didn't have a role model because my father was killed, so mother was a single mother, so I didn't know what it was like to see 2 adults and how they interacted. It's not an excuse. I clearly failed in my marriage, and I was brought up that you've got to keep going, and I probably stayed at it longer than I healthily should have done. But you, in your own way, are determined to give your 3 boys not only an education like you had, but also a happy relationship where you and your wife work at it. And I really admired that. Thinking about your boys, their age, if I remember, 24, 22, and 18, and some into business, some just finishing university, another just finishing his A-levels. What bit of advice do you wish you'd given yourself if you could travel back to the future, meet the young Harry aged 18? What would you say, Harry, this matters, but that doesn't matter? What would you tell yourself about what matters, knowing what you know now?
I'd say keep the resilience. That does matter. I'd say even when things look as dark as they possibly can look, they pass. Everything is survivable, apart from death.
Yeah.
Everything is survivable. And so when, as an 18-year-old, one stresses inordinately about not just the small things, but the big things, I've learned over the years that actually nothing is so big that it cannot ever be survived. And the third thing that I would remind my young self, something which I've always practiced, is to have an interior life. So you have the extrovert, the exterior life. Even if you're an introvert, you have the life where you are on display and people can see you as someone on display. But then it's that interior life you need to cultivate. The introspective, the questioning, the curious, the reflective life. And that, I think, is extremely important for mental health, as well as a very good grounding of yourself as somebody who can contribute to the community in which you exist and work.
Brilliant. No, I'm reminded of the Roman emperors, or was it King Solomon had his slave who would say to him quietly in one ear, when things have gone well, sire, this too shall pass. And when things have gone terribly badly, this too shall pass. And I do think it's a good reminder to me that things do pass. But at the moment, at that time when you're a young man, it seems like, you know, it's the biggest disaster in the world and it's going on to you. Why me? And the pessimists see it as permanent, persistent, and personalized and pervasive. And that's when you've got to break any of those by showing, is it really? And that unravels it. Biggest regret in life and a crucible moment that shaped you?
Biggest regret in life will surprise many who know me, that, or maybe it won't, that I didn't do the sort of work that I'm doing now with the Black Talent Charter earlier. Now, the explanation for that is that I didn't have a voice earlier. But there's another view, which is this, that when I was at school, I did well at school. I enjoyed it, as I've said, and I also did well. And a lot of my peers said, oh, you're going to go very far, Harry. You're going to do well in public life. They expected me to do that. I wanted to go to the bar, and I chose a career which is a career spent very much on one's own, doing cases, and one can become eminent, preeminent even, but it is very much doing one case after another. and not being a big mover of events on the public plane. Now, I don't regret being at the bar. I've learned a huge amount at the bar, but I think that there's always going to be somebody at the bar. There's always going to be somebody to argue a case at the bar. But how many people have an opportunity to really change society in a material way? And there's always something in me which wonders whether I could and should have done something earlier. But against that, I'm unashamed in saying that my greatest ambition throughout my life is that if I have children, I must bring up those children in the way that I hope I've managed to achieve with the support of, or my wife has managed to achieve with my support, which is to give them a happy home and a solid education.
Yeah,
that's the greatest achievement.
Fantastic. And I think you've talked about a number of crucible moments already, so I'll leave on that one. Let's go around the inspiring leadership compass. Certainly in the field of law, we need trust, we need honesty, we have a Bible to promise that people will not perjure themselves. And too many in public life we're seeing now are happy to have been fired a number of times for lying in their previous jobs, and then they lie in public office and they seem to get away with it. Like, really? Are we just completely ruling this out? So what is your true north that makes you authentic, your sort of MQ, the moral quotient? And what did you learn when you let those key values that you live by, and you might mention a couple of them, slip, and how you got yourself back on course? Because we all do slip at times, and we have to, you know, reorientate ourselves to stick to our values and integrity.
Well, integrity is the first requirement, it seems to me. Whether you're a lawyer or not, if you don't have integrity, whether you're a leader or not, if you don't have integrity, that is a serious problem. I like to think that I have never lost my integrity, because that matters very, very much to me. And it's part of what I described as my interior life, my self-reflection. How can I look myself in the mirror if I'm ashamed of myself fundamentally to the core? We all make mistakes, as you say, Jonathan, but that doesn't mean that we don't retain our integrity, even if we've made mistakes. And so that's important to me. And then the other quality, which is absolutely important to me and has become more so as I've become more senior, is the concept of moral courage. Moral courage is as I would see it, the courage that makes you live your values, even though you are aware of and fearful of the consequences. And that doesn't really come into play so much when you're junior, but as you become more senior, as you become more able to influence events immediately around you, the question comes in your interior moments, are you going to? Or are you just going to continue having a perfectly nice life as it is? And it's that impelled me to start the Black Talent Charter, and it is that has kept me going with the Black Talent Charter. And it's only when you exercise moral courage that you see that there is more in your tank than you ever thought you had. And is it a muscle? I don't know.
Yeah, it is. I think it's got to be practiced.
It's got to be.
Thank you. And I look to people like General the Lord Dannatt, John Stoker, John Griffin. They have been leaders I worked for. All happened to be military men that I'd served under, but they had very strong integrity and were a role model for me in the absence of a father figure about the way to do things right and do the right things, even if it cost them. And in the case of Richard Dannatt, he challenged Gordon Brown and Tony Blair because one wanted to fight the wars and the other one wasn't prepared to pay for them. And so soldiers were dying through lack of body armor or protection on their armored vehicles. And Gordon didn't like the fact that he stood up to him. So he deliberately stopped him becoming chief of the defense staff when it was he was the man selected for it. And he stood out for that. And it meant he lost the very top job, but he did the right thing.
And doing the right thing is so fundamental. You've mentioned, Jonathan, one of the people who inspires you. One of the people who inspires me in my professional life, always has, is Sidney Kentridge, with whom I had the immense privilege to work as his junior on a couple of cases. Sidney Kentridge is a luminary name at the bar and in the law. Everybody will know him. He practiced in South Africa for many years. He acted for Nelson Mandela in the first trials that Mandela had to face. He acted for Steve Biko's family in the Biko inquest, and then he came to England to establish his career at the bar in England all over again, starting from the bottom, and rose very fast to preeminence at the commercial bar. But Sidney Kentridge is more than a brilliant barrister. There are many brilliant barristers. He is a man. He is a man not just of integrity, but a man who is unafraid to stand up to power and with a quiet but compelling voice to preach truth to power. Not just truth, but to lead at the bar by his example. And he doesn't say what he's doing. He just does it. He's now in retirement, but he, for me, is the model barrister. Undemonstrative, but the most effective because he has a natural authority born of his integrity and his moral courage.
Fabulous. What a man. It'd be lovely to have him on this series. He would
be very good.
He would be very special. Perhaps we should arrange that. And that takes me from the first part, the true north, the moral compass, to the next element of the 8 points on the compass, PQ, meaning and purpose. Why do you do what you do? What's your calling, your dharma, your vocation? Why do you do what you do? Particularly, I think you've talked very nicely about the Black Talent Charter and why you do that. So you don't need to repeat that. That's very, but why do you do the law work that you do?
I do the law that I do because it interests me. Although after doing it for 30 years, you feel that you've done everything, that you've seen everything that can be seen. But everything I do because I want to do it to the best of my ability. If you're talking about my professional life, I want to do it to the best of my ability, and I want to make a contribution in what I'm doing to ensure that the side which I am representing has the best possible representation that I can give it. It's about holding myself to a standard in order to deliver something for a client who needs my assistance. And that's pretty fundamental to me. Yeah,
just on that one, I've always wondered, particularly those who are dealing, maybe commercial law, but those who are dealing in criminal law, when a legal representative realizes that their own person they're representing is lying and is actually guilty, how does the law work in that case? What does that do? I mean, they should stand down and say that this is it, forget it, he's guilty, I resign, whatever. But it doesn't often happen. They often know that they're fighting for the person who has done wrong and their side hasn't got a case, but they'll still keep doing it. And there seems to be a strange system where there's, almost like no win, no fee. Because having gone through the divorce procedures, buckets of money of our family wealth was put in. But if your representative does a poor job, you still have to pay. And if you lose, you still have to pay. I don't know if you have a view on those kind of contentious issues.
Well, of course I have a view, Jonathan. Every advocate must wrestle with that problem. But the wrestling has been is light now because those who have gone before us have had exactly that problem to wrestle with, and it's now crystallized into a rule of the bar that is known as the cab rank rule, which says that if you've got a case, regardless of what you think of the merits or the worth of or the morality of someone who wants you to help them, you must help them. And that is true of civil practice as well as criminal practice. It's different for solicitors who can pick and choose their own clients. I believe very strongly in that rule, although many cynics will tell you that it's observed more in the breach than in the practice. But for me, it is very important, because there are many times when I have, in my commercial work, I do a lot of fraud, civil fraud work, for example, when I have come across clients of mine about whom I might have taken a certain view that what they had done was inappropriate, shall we put it that way. That doesn't stop me from acting for them, because it seems to me that there is always something that can be said of everybody. And it goes to another fundamental core of my being, which is that we're all flawed. We're all deeply flawed. And I found in practice that many people who behave inappropriately do so often in extremis.
Yes. And people, if you choose the perception that people come intending to do good, there's some people who are purely evil, and I've met one or two in my time, both in the military and since then, who are on the dark triad, the narcissistic, Machiavellian, psychopathic. And it's really quite scary. One who took a huge amount of money from me as a fraudster. And I remember being with him, and you could sort of tell him, you could see him working out his next angle and his next lie, and how he would be so convincing. So interesting in itself. We won't go off down that rabbit hole, but thank you for that. Health is next, because health quotient, the third of there, is you give so much to your work and to the causes you believe in, such as the Black Talent Charter, which requires leadership and commitment. We never get work-life balance. Someone described it as better as work-life integration, but part of that work-life integration is to look after your physical health and your mental health. And at times, you and I have talked about this, you've given so much to the work and the family that there's not much time for your physical and your mental health. However, what would be your top tip for your physical health that's worked for you with your incredible schedule, and also looking after your mental health in challenging times? What tips would you give on each?
I discovered this in lockdown, as did many of my peers. And we've discussed that I've got my work-life balance all wrong. Certainly prior to lockdown, it was hopelessly wrong. And it still is a challenge, and it is one of the great problems of practice as a self-employed barrister. Every barrister you speak to will speak of the difficulty of maintaining a decent work-life balance, or integration, however you choose to call it. In lockdown, and so my health was damaged. I got cancer.
Wow.
And things are on an even keel now. But in lockdown, I took exercise. When we were all locked down and we could only take however many hours exercise it was, I started doing that. And it was not good only for my physical health, but I noticed a very great difference to my stress management, which is basically the problem that one faces. And just walking up, we're on the South Downs where I am here, and just walking up the hill onto the downs, just being in nature. You don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to pump iron. Just going for a walk. The doctors are talking about it nowadays. Just going for a walk, being in nature, again, allowing your interior self to take precedence over the Sturm und Drang, as the Germans would have called it, of modern life. But doing so in a natural environment is fundamentally important.
So Harry, what we'll do after this in the coming months, I'll invite you up here, and you're going to come for a walk with me in nature. and we'll have some time to think together. I'm going to get you up here. We'll catch the train. I'll do this. I do this with my other CEOs. I take them for a walk.
Well, you look physically fitter than I am, so we'll plot the path.
A gentle one.
Like that.
A gentle one. I'd very much love having time with you. Emotional and social intelligence is the next one, and you are respected by people for your ability not only to have the high IQ but the high EQ, the way you relate to people, connect. It's been so easy in our conversations over the last year or two just to listen to you, the rapport you can easily build. If there was a top tip for you on rapport building, influence, whatever it is, what would your top tip be? What's a skill that you've learned and you find
that's difficult? I haven't really analyzed it, because I suppose if I need to, it's to listen. And that's something which I wish I could say that to a lot of my colleagues at the bar, because we're so used to talking, all of us. Not many of us are very good at listening. And if you listen to people, not just hear them, but actually listen to them, there's things they don't say, the gaps in the sentences, you get a lot more out of them, and you discover qualities in them which are not visible on first meeting. And I'm very interested in people. I'm curious. I love seeing new people with new ideas. And I think it's that, well, it makes life interesting. And if we only go around talking to people, we're going to get rapidly onto the whole diversity issue, and let's steer away from that. But if we only go to people we're comfortable with, to people we think that we can talk to or at, you immeasurably diminish the life experience that you yourself can get and the contribution that you can make to their lives. So listen to people.
So true. And I lightly stepped over a very big thing that you mentioned that I heard and I listened to. But the fact that you have had cancer and that you're dealing with it, my heart goes out to you. And there is much that can be done in eat, move, sleep, breathe, focus, prosper to help us in the battle with cancer. And there's no doubt about it that more adrenaline and cortisol in the body, it causes inflammation in the body, which does lead to cancer. So what have you learned about your battle with cancer, which has been a heroic battle? And at the moment, maybe seeing it as a war is the wrong way to see it, but at the moment you're winning, but what have you learned from it?
First of all, I don't call it a heroic battle. It's something that 1 in 2 people get and deal with, and the advances in medicine have been astonishing over the years. So those of us who are one of the 50% of people who get it, caught early, as in my case, have very good prospects. So it's not heroic. What it does do is that it crystallizes your thinking somewhat. And you said in an earlier part of our conversation, Jonathan, how the tragic losses that you have suffered very recently, the bereavements that you have suffered, have made you face up to the prospect that we're not here forever. And the same has happened with me. What can you achieve in the time available to you? Are you living, the phrase is, are you living your best life? Are you doing what you want to do, given the other commitments that you have to other people? And that continues to impel the work that I'm doing on the Black Talent Charter, in the hope that it will create some change.
Yeah.
It also impels what I am trying to do to make sure that my family is on the right course, not just financially, but in other ways, deeper ways.
Yeah, it does. And at the end of the day, when I've been in churches at funerals and remembering people or scattering ashes, it's the relationships, it's the family. It's not the fact your inbox is still full and needs emptying. And the 5 regrets of the dying in that book is about I wish I hadn't spent so long in the office. I wish I'd spent more time with my family and friends. I wish I'd I'd lived my life, not a life that other people wanted me to live. Those are just some of the five. I couldn't remember the last ones, but that.
Well, I have all three regrets, I'm afraid.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, but now we still have time to do something about it, and let's just touch briefly on the other questions I've got, almost quick fire, because I do want to cover them, but I also want to get to your top tip. Top tip on CQ, as I call it, the collaborative, cognitive, and cultural intelligence, getting on with people who are different from you. Top tip there?
Be curious.
Yeah,
it's what I've said already.
Yeah.
Be curious, and it's very easy.
Yeah.
And you'll find that there's more commonality and more interest from other people, and that your stereotypical or initial view of them is very often wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was what was so good for me going to Peru with 10 complete strangers of all races and backgrounds from different countries. It was actually very good for me because I didn't know any of them and just took them at face value. But even then, in my mind, I'd made a judgment in the first few minutes of meeting them, which I had to let go of completely because they were very different from how I'd even thought they were. So suspend judgment, I think, is
well, I'm not sure about suspend judgment. I think we all make instinctive initial judgments, and sometimes they're a very good defense mechanism when you just feel that someone isn't right or something isn't right. But be prepared to change your judgment.
That's really good. Thank you. I like that one. Be prepared to change. It's the non-attachment. Don't be attached to a particular position. Yeah. Resilience, RQ. Top tip on, your resilience is a key thing for you. What's your top tip on resilience?
Beyond saying habit, I'm not sure how you can acquire it. It's a habit of mind that when things go badly wrong, I suppose when things go badly wrong, remember that everything is survivable.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And that builds your resilience.
Yeah. Brand is the next one.
Yeah.
Have you, in the last few years, had 360 feedback from 20 other people done by an independent person? And what did you learn about yourself?
Answer, no, I haven't.
Yeah, well, maybe we should.
All I do, I'm just guided by, again, we come back to the interior self.
Yeah.
And I'm my own severest critic, I think.
And what is so interesting in high achieving leaders like yourself is that whether it be from the parents, I was listening to Rangan Chatterjee, who does the doctors podcasts and things like that. And he said, his Indian parents, when he came back, he said, I got 99%. They go, well, what happened to the 1%? Why didn't you get 100? And all the time it was making him push himself harder and harder. But that in itself, you have to unpack later in life. Legacy. What would you like your legacy to be in your personal life and your work in a sentence?
I would like people to think that I had integrity, that I was kind. I think kindness is a crucially important value, because in being kind, you are doing quite a lot. You are being empathetic, you are being curious, you are being self-critical, and you are not putting yourself forward, giving other people space, all of that. In my professional life, integrity and holding myself to a standard. Yeah.
Brilliant. When you've got somebody who's working with you who is toxic and affects the team or the unit you're in, what would be your top tip about dealing with someone who's toxic?
I've never been in a position where I've had someone who's on my team who's toxic. But what I do say is that I will not tolerate bullies.
Yeah.
And we come back to morals, courage. If you know and see somebody who is being a bully, somebody's got to have the moral courage to say, the consequences may be difficult for me, but I've got to make a stand. And the bully doesn't have to be an obvious cartoon character you're dealing with, but it can be just someone in a position of authority who a judge, for example, in my practice, who demands a certain level of attention, regardless of the views of others. And there comes a time when someone, particularly of my seniority, must be prepared, if one has, in the rare occasions where one has a judge like that, to stand up. And I would be prepared to protect any of my juniors to the hilt.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's another quality of leaders, is that leaders have to protect their team and they have to take the blame.
Yeah.
Even if it's the fault, if you can call it that, of a junior, leadership requires that you take the hit externally and then you have a discussion with the junior.
Yeah, beautifully put. I'm reminded of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the night before D-Day, wrote 2 letters. One saying he was really very proud of the success of D-Day, and he gave the accolades to Bradley and Patton and all the other generals. What a great example they'd led. And the second one was a letter he wrote about he was really terribly disappointed about the failure of D-Day, and he personally took full accountability for its failure. And I'm reminded that it sticks with me every day. The last question, then we'll do the 2-minute top tip, is a favorite book on leadership or on something about life that helps us. What would be your favorite book?
I haven't read any books on leadership. I've muddled through. But one book which I found very interesting, almost inspiring, is a fairly controversial book now, I think, called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, who's a fellow of All Souls and a highly regarded English literature don and psychology don. And he wrote this magnificent book, which was a thesis on the 2 sides of the brain, as he described it. The one side of the brain, which is good at analytical thought. This is a terrible summary and shorthand of what he's saying. And the other side of the brain, which is the creative side of the brain. And of course, these are, again, caricatures of what happens in the brain. But it was, for me, very interesting in that the whole person is a combination of both. And if somebody is brilliant at one particular thing, for example, in my profession, we've got many people who are brilliant at analytical thought. That is one of the hallmarks of success at the bar. It doesn't mean that you are cleverer than somebody else who may not have that aptitude to the same extent as you, but who has a magnificent ability to listen, to empathize, to improve the lot of the people around them. That doesn't make them any less clever or any worse.
Very good.
I think you've got to look at the whole person.
Yeah.
You've got to be curious about people.
And this is where integrity, the integrated inspiring leader, it's as opposed to the disintegrated inspiring leader, where bits are missing.
Yes.
And this is where integrity and being integrated is so key. Thank you. Would you finally, to wrap it up nicely, just introduce yourself once more and what you do, and give us your 2-minute top tip on leadership, a practical advice?
Well, again, I'm Harry Matovu. I'm a barrister in practice at the commercial bar and a QC. I've been in practice for 30 years. And I've been asked about my top tips. It seems to me that you have got to hold yourself to a standard, first of all, both in your personal life and in your professional life. That's a high standard. And that doesn't mean that you won't fall from that standard, but you've got to try to maintain that standard there and try to meet it always. No points for failure, but no disgrace in failure, but have the standard and hold yourself to it. Second point, be authentic in everything that you do. Be authentic and listen. Listen to people. Listen to ideas. Read between the subjects. And third, and perhaps most of all, have moral courage in everything you do. Be prepared to take the difficult decision, even though you know it may have consequences, unhappy consequences for you. Because as I think it was Samuel Johnson said, of all the virtues that there are, the greatest is moral courage, because without moral courage, the other virtues cannot have expression.
Yeah.
Unless you have the courage to display them, they are worthless. So
Fantastic.
moral courage is very important.
Fantastic. Harry Matovu, QC, thank you very much for being our guest on the Inspiring Leadership Podcast. It was a real honor having you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was an honor for me and a privilege.